If you watch someone say, touch a hot stove, and just scream in pain,
Yeah.
you don't immediately copy them and place your own hand on the burner.
No, definitely not.
Right. You do the exact opposite. You back away.
Yeah.
But if you watch someone wave hello to you, you mirror them almost instantly.
Yeah, you raise your hand and wave back without even thinking about it.
Exactly. And have you ever stopped to wonder why we blindly copy some behaviors in like a fraction of a second,
Yeah.
but completely reverse engineer others based on what happens next?
It is wild. And, in everyday conversation, we tend to lump all of that under this broad umbrella of just learning by watching.
Right.
But when you actually look at the mechanics of human behavior, the processes driving those two scenarios couldn't be more different. One is a foundational physical building block of development, and the other is a highly sophisticated, complex social learning mechanism that requires, a completely different set of environmental variables.
And untangling those variables is our entire mission today. Welcome to a special edition deep dive for behavioral intelligence with Mara Sánchez.
So glad to be here.
If you are tuning in, you are likely deep in the trenches of your BCBA exam preparation. Today, we are zeroing in on a concept that is notorious for tripping up even the most prepared test taker.
Oh, absolutely notorious.
Yeah, it's Domain B, task list item B24. We're going to identify and completely distinguish between imitation and observational learning.
Getting this distinction down is vital for passing the exam, certainly. But it also dictates your effectiveness on the clinic floor.
Yeah, how so?
Well, when you are designing a skill acquisition program, knowing precisely which of these two processes you're trying to evoke, it dictates everything. It changes how you set up your physical environment, how you deliver prompts, and, how you schedule your reinforcement.
Right. And looking through our stack of rigorous ABA study guides and mock exams and conceptual breakdowns for this, it is so easy to see why these terms blur together.
They really do.
I mean, when you are staring at hundreds of flashcards at midnight, imitation and observational learning look suspiciously similar. They both require a model. They both result in a learner acquiring something new. So I just want to validate anyone listening who feels like they're reading the same definition twice.
Totally valid. The overlap is exactly where the confusion lives. Our goal today is to pull those concepts apart so completely that you can spot the difference on a multiple choice question from a mile away.
Yes.
And more importantly, apply the correct mechanism when you are writing a behavior intervention plan tomorrow.
Okay, let's unpack this absolute foundation first.
Yeah.
Looking through these study guides, they are militant about not using the word imitation loosely.
Very militant.
It's not just copying. The literature demands that a behavior meet 4 incredibly strict criteria to qualify as true imitation.
Right.
Starting with a model and immediacy.
Yeah. The BACB is rigid on this for a reason. If we don't define the parameters of imitation strictly, we can't measure it accurately.
Makes sense.
So those 4 non-negotiable criteria are the presentation of a model, immediacy, formal similarity, and a controlled relation. If even a single one of those elements is absent, whatever behavior you're looking at might be learning, sure, but it is not imitation.
Wow, okay. Let's dissect those because these are the exact terms our listener needs to hunt for in exam scenario.
Absolutely.
The first requirement is a model. There has to be an antecedent stimulus, which is simply a behavior demonstrated by someone else.
Right.
That could be a therapist deliberately clapping their hands during an intensive teaching trial, or it could be completely incidental, like a peer at recess suddenly jumping over a puddle.
Exactly. The key is that the physical action must be presented in the learner's environment. Without the antecedent model, the entire chain falls apart.
Okay, the second quality is where I actually want to push back a bit.
Okay, let's hear it.
The sources cite immediacy as the defining factor. But let's say I watch a 10-minute YouTube tutorial on how to tie a really complex fishing knot on a Tuesday. I study the video, I turn it off, and then on Thursday, I'm out on a boat, and I successfully tie that exact knot. Everyday logic says I imitated that video. Why is the behavior analytic community so strict about this time factor?
That is a brilliant distinction to bring up because everyday logic and behavioral mechanics often clash.
Yeah, they really do.
The reason you're not tying on Thursday is not imitation is due to stimulus control.
Oh.
For a behavior to be imitation, the model itself must be the active, present, discriminative stimulus that evokes the behavior. By Thursday, that video is gone from your environment.
So what is controlling my behavior on the boat then?
Most likely, rule-governed behavior or verbal mediation.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. When you watch the video on Tuesday, you are likely narrating the steps to yourself, like, loop the line over, pull it through the hole.
Yeah, definitely.
So on Thursday, you are responding to your own internal verbal rules or delayed recall, not the visual model. The model's power as an immediate discriminative stimulus decays rapidly. If the behavior doesn't happen immediately following the presentation of the model, the controlling variables have shifted, and it is no longer strict imitation.
That makes the temporal relationship so much clearer. It has to happen right now.
Right. Oh.
Moving to the third quality, formal similarity. The text says the model's behavior and the imitator's behavior must physically resemble each other, and they must share the same sense mode.
Right.
Wait, let's clarify that. By sense mode, do we just mean if the model is visual, the imitation must be visual?
That is a great way to think about it. The behaviors must be a topographical match across the same sensory modality.
Okay.
If the model touches their nose with their right index finger, which is a visual and motor presentation, the learner must touch their nose with their right index finger.
Got it.
And if the model produces an auditory stimulus by saying the word cat, the learner must produce an auditory stimulus by saying the word cat, which we specifically call an echoic. They look or sound the same.
And that brings us to the fourth and arguably most complex quality, a controlled relation.
Yeah, this one is tricky.
The text defines this as proving the model's action directly evoked the imitation. But how do we actually prove that mechanically? How do we know it wasn't just like a coincidence?
Well, we have to rule out environmental background noise. Let's look at how we prove a controlled relation.
Okay.
Suppose you have a toddler who frequently claps their hands whenever they get excited. A dog walks into the room, the toddler gets excited. An adult happens to clap their hands at that exact moment, and then the toddler claps their hands.
Well, we have a model, we have immediacy, and we have formal similarity.
Exactly. But we do not have a proven controlled relation.
Because of the dog.
Right. We can't actually prove the adult's clap caused the toddler's clap. The toddler's clapping might just be a coincidentally timed reaction to the dog entering the room.
That makes so much sense.
To establish a controlled relation, we need to demonstrate that the novel behavior occurred only because the model was presented and wouldn't have occurred otherwise in that specific moment. The model must be the exclusive controlling variable.
So it's like a highly restricted game of Simon Says.
Yes.
You have to execute the exact physical movement immediately after Simon does it. And the only reason you are doing it is because Simon did it.
Exactly.
And the sources point out that teaching this rigorous form of matching is considered a behavioral cusp.
Calling generalized imitation a behavioral cusp is honestly almost an understatement.
Really?
Oh, yeah. A cusp is a foundational skill that unlocks an entirely new universe of contingencies for a learner. Before a client acquires generalized imitation, every single physical movement or skill has to be explicitly, painstakingly taught through direct shaping and physical prompting.
Which is incredibly time-consuming and labor-intensive.
Highly labor-intensive. But once generalized imitation is mastered, the learner can start acquiring new skills dynamically, simply by moving through their environment and mirroring the people around them.
That's amazing.
Yeah, they suddenly have access to new social environments, new peer interactions, and exponential learning opportunities.
Okay, so if imitation requires this strict, formal, physical similarity, what is happening in the brain or the environment when we watch a model and learn to do the exact opposite? Like, we don't just act like recording devices playing back every movement we see. We evaluate. We calculate.
Right, and that evaluation, that shift from simply mirroring a physical topography to evaluating the outcome of an action, that is the dividing line between basic imitation and observational learning.
Let's define observational learning through that lens.
Yeah.
Because the definition here focuses entirely on a different variable. It's not about the topography of the movement anymore.
No, not at all. Observational learning occurs when an individual acquires a new behavior or modifies an existing one strictly by watching someone else encounter a contingency.
A consequence.
Exactly. The entire mechanism hinges on witnessing a consequence. You are watching a model experience reinforcement or punishment for their behavior. And based solely on observing their consequence, the frequency of your future behavior changes.
There is a fantastic everyday example in the study guides that brings this to life perfectly.
I love this one.
Right. Imagine you are waiting in a massive line at a coffee shop. You are incredibly eager to order the new limited edition seasonal drink. Let's call it The delicioso frappa mocha.
The delicioso frappes.
Yes, you have your payment ready, you have the exact name of the drink queued up in your head. But you are watching the person at the front of the line.
Okay.
They step up to the register and confidently order the delicioso frappa mocha.
Mm-hmm.
The barista immediately grimaces, shakes their head, and loudly announces, "I'm so sorry, we just sold out of the syrup for that for the rest of the day."
Classic. Now look at the mechanics of what happens next. When you finally reach the front of the line, what behavior do you emit?
I definitely don't ask for the delicioso frappa mocha.
Right.
I completely pivot. I look at the menu and order a standard cold brew instead. Based on watching that interaction 5 minutes prior, I drastically altered my intended behavior.
Let's break down the environmental variables there. You observed a model. The model emitted a specific behavior, requesting the drink. The model then contacted a consequence.
Being told no.
Right, in this case, their request was denied, which functions as extinction or even a mild punisher. Because you visually tracked that consequence, the probability of your own behavior, ordering the sold-out drink, dropped to 0.
Wow.
You learn from their failure without having to experience the denial yourself.
Wait, let me look at this from a structural standpoint. If I watch someone do something, process it, and change my behavior later when I get to the register, isn't observational learning just a fancy term for delayed imitation?
What's fascinating here is that the Starbucks scenario proves why it is definitively not delayed imitation.
How so?
Did you copy the model at the register?
No. The model ordered a sweet specialty drink. I ordered a black cold brew.
Exactly. You exhibited 0 formal similarity. In fact, you did the opposite of the model.
Oh, I see.
Direct imitation is anchored to the model's topography. You must physically match them. Observational learning is anchored to the model's consequence.
Right.
You aren't copying their action. You are internalizing the reinforcement or punishment they received and adapting your own repertoire accordingly.
That is the crucial wedge between the two concepts. Imitation equals mirroring the action. Observational learning equals adapting to the model's consequence.
Precisely.
Moving from theory to the therapy floor, how do these concepts actually manifest when we are running sessions or designing interventions? We know the definitions, but how are we utilizing these processes practically?
Well, let's start with modeling as a response prompt, which is ubiquitous in clinical ABA.
Very common.
Think of a physical education teacher standing in front of a student, demonstrating the exact way to bend the knees and flick the wrist for a basketball free throw.
Right.
The teacher is providing an antecedent physical demonstration to evoke the correct topography from the student.
But the literature emphasizes a massive prerequisite rule here. You cannot just walk up to a client, start pantomiming a task, and expect it to function as a prompt.
Absolutely not. Modeling is entirely useless if the learner does not possess foundational prerequisite skills, and the most critical prerequisite of all is the ability to attend to the model.
If the client is looking at the ceiling or focused on a spinning toy in their hand, your modeled free throw stance doesn't exist in their functional environment.
No, it doesn't. The clinical reality is that attending the ability to orient your body, sustain eye contact, and visually focus on the therapist must be established first.
Right.
If you write an intervention plan that relies heavily on modeling prompts for a client who hasn't mastered attending, the program will stall. You must establish the prerequisite before you can leverage the prompt.
That covers direct modeling. But let's dive into the clinical power of observational learning, because there is a study cited in our sources, Griffin et al., 1992, that completely recontextualizes how efficient therapy can be.
Oh, yeah.
This study is fascinating.
The Griffin study is a masterclass in the secondary effects of learning environments. The researchers were working with students who had developmental delays.
Okay.
They set up a scenario to teach a multi-step food preparation chain, essentially, a task analysis for making a specific snack in a kitchen setting.
And they were using a direct instruction method called a constant time delay procedure on one target student.
Right.
Just to refresh the listener, that means the therapist gives the instruction, waits a standard fixed amount of time, say 3 seconds, and then provides a controlling prompt if the student doesn't initiate the step. Eventually fading out the need for the prompt so the student performs the step independently to access reinforcement.
Exactly. Now, while that intensive one-on-one teaching trial was happening with the target student, the researchers placed 2 other students in the room.
Okay.
These 2 observing students were simply sitting at a nearby table. They were not given instructions. They were not prompted. They were not directly reinforced.
Hang out.
Just hanging out. Their only role was to sit and observed the target student move through the kitchen, perform the steps, and receive the reinforcement.
They were just visually tracking the contingencies playing out across the room.
Yes. And later, the researchers brought those two observing students up to the counter and tested them on the food preparation chain. The results were staggering.
That happened.
Without having received a single direct teaching trial, the observing students independently and correctly performed at least 85% of the steps in the chain.
85% mastery just from sitting at a table and watching a peer's reinforcement schedule.
Yeah.
That completely changes the math on running a clinic.
Think about the massive clinical multiplier effect here. If you are running a social skills group or a classroom environment and you have systematically established observational learning in your clients, your efficiency skyrockets.
Wow.
You don't have to run discrete trials for every single skill with every single learner.
You reinforce client A for raising their hand to ask for a preferred item. Client B and client C visually track that reinforcement. Suddenly, client B and client C start raising their hands.
Right.
You taught 3 learners by directly intervening with only one.
It perfectly illustrates why transitioning a learner from basic, rigid imitation to dynamic observational learning is a primary clinical goal. It transforms how they extract information from their social environment.
So what does this all mean? Let's put on our test-taking hats. For the listeners sitting at their desk, highlighting their notes and staring down the BCBA exam, how do we avoid the common traps the exam writers lay out for task list item B.24?
The exam questions for this domain will test your ability to isolate the controlling variable in a chaotic scenario. You need to become a detective, scanning for very specific mechanical keywords.
Okay, like what?
If a scenario describes a learner perfectly replicating a teacher's physical movement, and the question emphasizes that the replication happens immediately after the teacher's action.
You are looking at imitation.
Exactly.
The immediate discriminative stimulus is the model's physical topography. The key words to circle on the screen are formal similarity and immediacy.
Spot on. Now contrast that with a different scenario. The exam describes a learner watching a peer complete a math worksheet. The peer hands the worksheet to the teacher and receives a token and verbal praise.
Okay.
Subsequently, the observing learner quickly finishes their own worksheet and runs up to the teacher.
That is the hallmark of observational learning. The dead giveaway is that the observer witnessed a consequence applied to a third party.
Right.
They didn't just copy the physical act of writing. Their behavior was accelerated because they observed the reinforcement contingency. The controlling variable is the model's consequence, not just the model's action.
If you can cleanly separate those two controlling variables, the topography of the model versus the consequence delivered to the model, you will navigate those questions with ease.
We also need to circle back to that prerequisite trap we discussed earlier. The BICB loves to test the sequential order of skill acquisition.
Oh, they do.
A question will inevitably ask, what foundational skill must be established before initiating an imitation training program?
And the multiple choice options will be loaded with distracting, technical-sounding answers like motor matching, echoic repertoires, or joint attention.
But the mechanical answer is always attending.
Always.
The ability to sit, orient toward the therapist, and visually focus.
It is the prerequisite to the prerequisite. If they aren't looking at you, they can't see the discriminative stimulus.
You can't copy what isn't in your functional field of vision. Keep it mechanically simple.
We've covered a tremendous amount of ground today, tracing the evolution from a toddler mechanically clapping their hands to a coffee shop patron avoiding a sold-out drink to the incredible efficiency of group observational learning in a kitchen setting.
It makes you look at every interaction in a crowded room a little differently.
It really does. But before we wrap up this session, I want to leave you with a broader conceptual puzzle to mull over.
Okay, let's hear it.
We've established that observational learning requires witnessing someone else experience a consequence. But where does that mechanism intersect with rule-governed behavior?
Oh, that is a fascinating rabbit hole.
Think about the boundaries of observation. Can you experience observational learning just by hearing a detailed story about someone else's consequence without ever physically seeing the model perform the action? If a friend verbally describes in vivid detail how they touched a hot stove and severely burned their hand, and as a result, you never touch that stove, did you just engage in an auditory form of observational learning?
Wow.
Or are you simply following a verbally mediated rule? Where is the exact behavioral line between observing a physical contingency play out and being verbally warned about one?
That is a deep, provocative thought to chew on while you are driving to your clinic or reviewing your mock exams tonight. The intersection of verbal behavior and social learning is where behavior analysis gets truly complex and incredibly interesting.
It really is.
Thank you for joining us on this special BCBA Exam Prep Deep Dive. We invite you to continue following the BCBA study series for behavioral intelligence con Mara Sánchez.
Highly recommend it.
To deepen your ABA conceptual understanding, clarify these tricky task list items, and supercharge your exam prep, make sure you are utilizing Amethyst Therapy Services.
Yes.
You can explore all their incredible study resources by visiting www.amethysttherapyservices.com. And if you have any questions, need further clarification on the B24 task list item, or want to debate the nuances of rule-governed behavior, reach out to them directly at info@amethysttherapyservices.com.
They'd love to hear from you.
The next time you're at a party and you see someone attempt a wild spin on the dance floor and wipe out, just smile. You didn't just avoid a fall, you successfully executed an observable, measurable instance of observational learning based on a model's punishment contingency.
Beautifully said.
Keep studying hard. Trust the science, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.